Good evening. You're looking here at the last 3 hours, at least as far as the radar. And if you look closely here, hard to find the eye. That's good news. This is an asymmetrical system. Hurricane hunters are out there right now. They're not finding a rapidly developing system. If you notice right along the coast, over the last 3 hours, the western side, basically the last of the rain, has now gradually eroded from the west. And except for a few showers left up toward Glenn County, that is it. And it's now, Ian is now 130 miles east of St. Johns County and should continue trekking to the north and northeast. All the indicators are that it will continue to do that. So making it, that is, due east by about 130 miles of the Florida-Georgia line after the midnight hour, and then east of Brunswick by about 120 miles at least by about 4 o'clock in the morning. So overall, except for those showers that are still left around Glenn County, the rain is over. The winds are gusty, maybe some occasional gusts of 50 east of Highway 17, but certainly have diminished significantly. So all that's left that we have to deal with is the water that's in the basins now. That is in the estuaries, and then what the high tide will pour into that. So the high tide that we're about to approach is the next critical high tide. We think that because in most areas the winds have become north to northwesterly, that there's not any new additional water pouring in. We don't have rainfall, so we're going for those water levels in most areas to be a little bit lower than the high tide we had earlier. So again, if your businesses and homes were either impacted by or it was a close call, then at least conditions are going to be a little bit better. Not dramatically yet, but a little bit better as we head toward that high tide. And of course, that timing of the high tide depends on where you are. Let's talk about some of the critical counties. St. Johns and Flagler, who have definitely had the heaviest rains, the highest winds, the most significant storm surge. Not expecting any more rain. Gusts really, maybe some occasional gusts to 50, but mostly now beginning to top off at 45 as we head toward the midnight hour. And I mention that because it's just after midnight that we're going to have our next high tide. And as a general rule, especially if we think of as downtown St. Augustine as our core for the tidal levels we're watching, that was at about 4.5 feet, 4.5 feet with the earlier high tide. That was at about noon on Thursday, going for this to be about 6 inches lower. I know it's not a lot, but when you consider that last night at this time we thought we would have 3 accumulative high tides, the fact that it's not going to be any worse, at least I think that's good news. And for at least some of you folks, 6 inches could make a big difference. In Duval, again, no more rain. Mostly the few gusts left along the river and the beaches to about 45, and we're going to drop about 6 inches off the St. Johns as well. So again, to put the St. Johns in perspective for Duval County, if you remember Irma peaked out at about 5.5. We peaked out earlier today at about 3.5, and I think we'll be at about 3. So still high. We'll still back up into some of the creeks and the rivers around the area, but at least now we're not worried about rain draining or can't drain into that area because no rain. So that is we're simply going to be looking at water backing up through the estuaries and through some of the drainage systems. And that high tide, as an average, going to use downtown Main Street, that's going to be at 2:15. Great news in Clay County. Again, we mentioned this earlier, but no additional rain, and there just was not enough rain to even cause a minor flood on the Black Creek. Now, the St. Johns is high, not as high there as other areas, but still, you're going for a high tide that, of course, is later in the morning, about 4 to 7 in the morning, depending on where you are or how far south you are on the St. Johns, and maybe some gusts right along the banks, dropping down to about 40 miles per hour. And then we're going to, of course, include you folks in Glenn, Camden, and Nassau counties because the weather for you will improve latest, although except for maybe a few downpours out around St. Simon's Island. For the most part, your rain is out of there as well. I think your water level rise at high tide, which is also going to be just after midnight, will be about 4 feet above normal and maybe some gusts to about 50 miles per hour. Now, we're not mentioning those of you over Ware, Charlton, Pierce, and Brantley, or over north central Florida as far as Baker, Union, Bradford, and Columbia counties because we don't see any weather problems for you. But the best way to verify this stuff is to look at the current conditions, and Michaela Lucero is going to do that for us right now.
Hey, thanks, Tim. And yeah, you're right. We're watching the wind. What we talked about, the wind is moved down, and now the winds are something we're monitoring as well. So as far as those directions go, here's what the winds look like at the moment. Let's pick that up. All right, can you hear me now? Here's what it looks like now.
As far as those winds go, the direction's coming from the north, which is great. That means that some of the wind no longer coming from the east, pushing water into the coastline. It's now coming down from the north. Let's put some numbers on these winds and wind gusts. Wind direction still from the north. Sustained winds between about 15 to 25 miles an hour. Some small spots are closer to 35 miles an hour, but the winds are really starting to drop in their intensity. I know we've been walking you through these all afternoon, all evening, and now into our overnight hours. We've been walking you through what these winds look like, and if you've been with us, you can see a big change and what these winds look like. As far as our wind gusts go, about 37 for Mayport, 33 there in St. Augustine, Jacksonville at about 44, NAS Jax 47, one of our gustiest spots at the moment. Palatka, you're sitting at about about 30 miles an hour there. All right, satellite and radar picture. Let's talk about what we're working with at the moment. Big picture here, and you can see most of that rain is completely out of here. If we get any more rain for tonight, it's just going to be a very light, very stray shower, mainly out there for our coastal region. So a zoomed in look, let's go through it county by county. So when we look at places like in southeast Georgia, Nassau County, Charlton, Ware, it is nice and dry. Even some of the cloud cover is starting to break up and move out. As we get a little bit more into our central counties, Duval, St. John's, portions of portions of Clay County as well. It is nice and clear out there. St. Augustine, a few sprinkles here and there, but again, that's the last little tiny bit of that rain that's starting to move out and continuing to push off towards the east. Putnam County, Flagler County, same story there, just a couple stray showers along the coast. But again, the majority of that rainfall is out of here. About 95% of us are dry and will continue to stay dry. Those far western counties across the First Coast, I don't have anything to show you there. It is nice and clear and quiet, and we're expected to continue with that pattern. All right, let's talk about where this storm is going. Hurricane Ian is expected to continue to progress off towards the north and impact places like Savannah into Charleston as well. Myrtle Beach already getting quite a bit of that wet weather. So here is a zoomed in look at some of the areas that we're expecting to see some impacts. So places like Charleston, as well as Somerville, they're already getting some of that rainfall. Henderson in South Carolina, Cross as well. A little more of a zoomed in look. They're expecting landfall near the Charleston area. So let's see, Sullivan's Island, that's a spot that could be seeing some major impacts as that storm system begins to pull a little bit closer. The Isle of Palms, Mount Pleasant, those are areas as well that are near Charleston that are expecting to, that are expecting to get some of those more significant impacts as that storm approaches. All right, let's move into a few other spots a little bit further south from Charleston, Centerville, Folly Beach. Again, they're already starting to see showers moving through, so those are areas that we're going to need to pay attention to as that storm approaches them. Now, again, here on the First Coast, we are starting to at least quiet down a little bit, not seeing as many impacts as we once were earlier on today. And again, the biggest impact that we're going to be watching still going to be those gusty winds that we've been telling you about. Okay, let's talk about the flooding threat that we've been mentioning. Okay, here are the max flood times. We've been telling you about high tide. So here's when those high tides will be coming through for tonight. So 12:15 for Jax Beach, 2:15 for the Main Street Bridge, Buckman Bridge, that's going to be close to 4 a.m. Shands 7 a.m. St. Mary's, 12:45 Brunswick, St. Augustine, 12:45 as well. So not too far off from now. As of this time, we're at 10:15 at night. So we're really not too far off from seeing a number of these high tides. And again, the high tide we saw earlier today, that was the one that we really thought brought the major impacts that we were going to see. This next high tide, this third high tide, still going to bring some impacts, still going to be significant for some, but not as significant as what we saw earlier. Big difference, we're not seeing rain right now. It's bringing that steady rainfall at the moment, So that's some good news there. We'll get one more peek at the radar, and then we will have another update in the next hour or so. But one more peek at what we're looking like across the First Coast as far as the rainfall goes. At the moment, we're just dealing with 1 or 2 spots out there on the coast, seeing just a few of those stray showers here and there. The majority of the rain has moved out and will continue to move out as we move throughout the rest of the night tonight and into tomorrow, your Friday. We have got some spots will get some sunshine that will be on the way. We'll have